Welcome to DNET, the Disability Network. I'm Bill McQueen. Susan Pettit-Crossman is away this week. On today's show, we'll see how Advocacy helped a student with a disability fulfill his ambitions. Stephen Veldstra couldn't take a photography course because he couldn't get into the darkroom. We'll find out how the problem was solved. And we'll take a look at Medic Alert bracelets. How effective are they? And later on in the show, we'll announce the winner of our baseball quiz. First, here's this week's Disability News highlights. The federal government has launched a 2-year process designed to overhaul Canada's entire social security system, a system that's very important to many people with disabilities. Julie Van Duzen has more from Ottawa.
Lloyd Axworthy says the reforms will lead to more effective social programs, but at the same time, he says they will be fair.
The purpose of such a thoroughgoing review and redesign is not to slash and trash, it's to renew and revitalize, to build a better system.
3 million Canadians are now living on a combination of social assistance and unemployment insurance. The programs they tap into, says Axworthy, often act as disincentives to getting back into the workforce. What's needed, he says, is a system that rewards effort and offers incentives.
The purpose is to find out what really works so that we can help people get back to work.
Many people get osteoporosis as they grow older. The disability weakens bones and limits activities. Lately, there's been a medical research breakthrough regarding the genetic basis of the disease. Chris Goldrick has more.
Until now, it was impossible to predict who would get osteoporosis, but now an Australian research team says it has discovered a gene that may indicate who is most prone to getting it.
If it is a susceptibility gene, if you can identify that easily in children, then as the article suggests, then you can certainly target that group.
It's estimated that over 1 million Canadians have osteoporosis. Women over the age of 50 are most susceptible. The disease often leads to fractured hips and damaged spines. Often the only way to treat the damage is with hip replacement operations or with painful spinal surgery.
And what will happen is the bone will eventually get so weak that it'll collapse and break. And in the back, that can happen just by sitting there, or it can happen with minor injuries. In the hip, it's usually associated with a minor fall.
What the discovery means is that young people who are likely to develop the disease can be identified early. Preventative steps such as calcium and protein supplements can then be taken. Dr. Jovasis says down the road the discovery may also be good news for those that already have the condition.
If this gene turns out that it's responsible for the disease, and maybe 5 or 10 years from now we could be looking at totally different drug therapies for people with established disease.
It may be years before this discovery yields results. Until then, the best way to protect yourself against osteoporosis is to avoid alcohol and smoking and to get plenty of exercise.
A Nova Scotia man who can't speak or hear won't have to stand trial on charges of molesting 4 children. Everett Roy can't read or write, and he doesn't understand sign language. This week, a judge ruled that Roy isn't able to communicate well enough to defend himself. Lisa Taylor has the story.
Everett Roy communicates with a series of homemade signs and gestures because he's never learned any type of formal communication. And that's caused a difficult legal problem. Between 1990 and 1993, Roy was charged with 5 counts of sexually touching children. But today, Judge Joseph Kennedy stayed those charges. His ruling was based on the findings of this man, Jamie McDougall of McGill University.
I think that turns back the clock to a time 300 years ago when deaf people were thought incapable of education.
McDougall is a McGill University psychologist specializing in deafness. He came to Nova Scotia to work with Roy in December after hearing about the case through media reports.
But his communication system is very specific to his environment, and we could not expect that Mr. Roy could develop all of the concepts and signs that would allow him to get a fair trial and understand the complex concepts that are there for the court system.
Roy used to work on fishing boats. He's lived with his sister ever since an injury forced him out of work. Psychiatrists say that Roy is mentally fit to stand trial, but his lawyer says it simply couldn't be done.
That he understood to some degree that these allegations were being made, and he was able to deny them in some fashion. But as far as being able to communicate for the purposes of a trial, that's a different game altogether, and that just wasn't possible.
So Roy is free to do as he pleases. There are no conditions placed on his freedom.
No, because the court has no jurisdiction over him. Once the charges are stayed, he's a free man.
Roy will continue to live with his sister, but Claudia Patterson admits she has no way of knowing if her brother ever did what he was accused of.
That's something we'll have to always live with, I guess. There's no way of proving it until I maybe catch him.
In handing down his decision, the judge said that society failed Everett Roy, and that today everyone pays for that failure. Roy will never have the chance to clear his name. His alleged victims will never tell their stories in court. And Nova Scotians now know that their justice system is flawed and can't always deal with those who go before it. Lisa Taylor, CBC News, Liverpool.
In our modern industrial society, we're exposed to varying degrees of toxic chemicals. Some people are more sensitive than others. The exposure can lead to a disability known as multiple chemical disorder. In Saskatchewan, a woman is seeking compensation for the disorder. Steve Pascalato has the details.
It's very upsetting, very upsetting. Yes, very, very upsetting, to say the least.
Sharon Laporte says she suffers from dozens of medical problems, including fatigue, short-term memory loss, and confusion. Now she says her union is making her even more sick.
And I see it as injustice. I see it as a tremendous injustice.
For 4 years, Laporte worked here at the SciAS Palliser campus in Moose Jaw as an occupational nurse. During that time, she says she was exposed to toxic fumes from the auto body repair shop and welding shop because of poor ventilation. A report done by Occupational Health and Safety in 1985 indicated in one instance involving paint fumes, the exposure was 100 times the level recommended for an 8-hour average and 40 times the level for a 15-minute peak exposure. Laporte says the fumes left her chronically ill.
I mean, there's days you can't do anything but stay in bed. There are days I cannot brush my teeth. There are days it's an effort to crawl out of my bed and get a drink of water and use the bathroom.
Doctors have diagnosed Laporte with multiple chemical sensitivities, a little-known disorder believed to be caused by pollutants. The federal government recognizes the condition and is paying her benefits, but her union, which is responsible for her long-term disability benefits, says it's all in her head and is refusing to pay.
Because we rely on medical opinion so much, it's quite difficult if the medical opinion isn't specific enough.
John Gerard is one of Laporte's doctors. He says there's more than enough evidence Sharon suffers from the disorder.
If you take her history, you find that it was related to her work. And when she was away from work, she would recover. When she went back to work, her symptoms returned.
Laporte's lawyer says the SGU just doesn't want to pay the estimated $200,000 he says she's owed.
You're talking a very, very large sum of money that she will be pursuing. And certainly that's in the back of the mind of the SGU right at the moment.
It's a merry-go-round. You complain and complain and complain and nothing ever gets done.
Laporte is taking the SGU to arbitration, but she isn't holding out much hope. The arbitrator is appointed by the union, so she says she's unlikely to get a fair hearing.
Our language is currently in a state of flux as we become more aware of how the words we use affect people. Political correctness is controversial in some circles, but as this report from the BBC shows, it's having an impact on sign language for people who are deaf.
Many of the gestures used in British Sign Language are based on caricature or stereotype. But now the trend towards politically correct signs, which started in the United States, is being adopted here, and racist signs are among the first to go.
Originally, when I was a young boy, we used this sign for black, to show the shape of lips, or to show the very large lips that some black people may have. And then again, we found that that was inappropriate, it wasn't politically correct, and now the sign has changed to stroke across the face or across the hand to mark Asian.
Many of the new signs are included in a recently published dictionary of British Sign Language, the first of its kind. This limp wrist action for homosexuals and lesbians is being replaced by these signs for gay and lesbian. And the old sign for a disabled person indicating severed limbs is out in favour of this sign based on the letter D. Campaigners for the deaf argue that sign language hasn't changed with the times as quickly as English because deaf people have been marginalised.
The deaf community does not have 24-hour television. The deaf community does not have a daily newspaper. And the other thing also is that sign language, it doesn't have a written form. So you cannot use that to disseminate that information quickly as well.
Good morning to you from
Now, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf says updating the sign language shows that deaf people want to take their rightful place in society. Christopher Burns, BBC News.
That's this week's roundup of disability news highlights. When we come back, a shot in the dark. Access, advocacy, technology, and jobs are key words to any person with a disability, or to people concerned with disability issues. Those words were also front and center recently at Dunnville Secondary School in Ontario. The issue concerned the school's photography course, which was not fully accessible.
Now it takes a little bit of thinking and planning before you run out and just shoot.
Persistence from Stephen and Mrs. Veldstra that they really wanted Stephen to be able to take the photography program resulted in all of us sitting down and really examining our photography program.
Stephen Veldstra is a graduating high school student. He wanted to take the photography course in this his final year, but he discovered the darkroom door was not only figuratively closed, it was literally closed as well.
I was interested in photography, but I noticed that I couldn't take it because the darkroom was not wheelchair accessible to me. And I asked the principal why I couldn't take it. She said it wasn't wheelchair accessible for me. And I told my mom that.
I did a little bit of investigating and found out, yes, indeed, the room was not accessible, and I phoned the Ministry for the Disabled and asked them what I could do.
Both Jerry and Ralph Veldstra are strong advocates for people with disabilities, and when they realized their son was serious about photography, they stepped in.
Signed up for the course, he did get a simple no. The room is not accessible, you cannot take that course. It's like, no, you can't take driver's ed, you're not 16, end of issue. And he just accepted it. He came home, mentioned it, and that was it. It wasn't until 2 years later when he complained again that I realized he was serious about taking the course that I stepped in.
The school has been excellent at helping us out at making it available if we'll get the people that'll push the issue, and that's where Pam Eve came in. She knew who to deal with.
We were sitting in her little office that I indicated my problem, and she made a good point and said, we have an excellent program in the public schools already to facilitate handicapped people. And I said, yes, but there's not a program so great that it cannot be improved upon, and that kind of stuck in her mind, and that's what she took to her superiors and to the principals that were in a position where they could help, and that's how she got it, Jen.
At one time, we thought that having physically challenged kids come to school was just a matter of getting them in the door. Then we realized we can get them in the door. Can we get them in the washroom? We can get them in the washroom. Now can we get them in the classroom? We can get them in the classroom. Now can we get them into the program? Are our programs appropriate for our students? And that's the stage that we're at now, making every program accessible for every child.
So then we came down to how could we resolve this problem? And the resolution really was our teacher, Mr. Topolniski, who knew so much about the computers and the use of computers for photography.
Stephen and the others, you guys can head over to the computer, the imaging stuff, and start working on the on your this week's assignment there, okay? Disc is loaded into the bottom of the camera. It allows you to capture up to 50 images. Once the image is shot, you can then scan it onto the computer.
This is a photo visualizer, and it enables me to make the picture smaller by cropping it. And I can flip the picture sideways if I wanted to. This takes the place of being in the dark room. So I can do everything out in the light.
Because you got the corner, you got that in the way there. Head's cut off there a little bit. Well, now we can basically offer photography and all the parts that go along with it, all the darkroom skills that normal or regular students would acquire can be offered through the computer programming now, without having to deal with the wet chemical problem that we would have if they were actually in the darkroom.
The more we thought about the use of the computers, how excited we became that we felt that finally we really had something that would provide career opportunities for our students, that we could provide them with a genuine skill that would give them a career out in the workplace.
It's amazing what a little insistence, planning, and cooperation can do, but without the initial push, nothing is accomplished. The inquest into the death of Clayton Sibb ended last week. Sibb wore a Medic Alert bracelet, and there was some discussion at that inquest about how much attention the medical people involved paid to that bracelet, which raises this question: how much protection do these devices really provide for the people who wear them? Suhana Marchand reports.
Medic 36.
It was June 1988. Clayton Sibb stopped in here one night for a drink. He collapsed at the bar. Someone called 911. Ambulance, paramedics arrived. They say Clayton Sibb refused all medical help. Then police arrived. They thought he was drunk. Police took Sibb down to 11 Division and locked him up for the night. The next day, back at home, he took a drug overdose. Clayton Sibb died that night. He was 33. That was 5.5 years ago. Only now do we know that Clayton Sibb probably needed medical help here at the bar. He was wearing one of these, a Medic Alert bracelet. On the back, it showed he suffered from neck tremors, a hiatus hernia, and was allergic to penicillin. But paramedics didn't look for the bracelet.
I didn't see it myself.
And paramedic Alan Craig says it wouldn't have made a difference anyway. He says the bracelets are notoriously inaccurate and at times have no medical value whatsoever.
We're treating patients, not Medic Alert bracelets. So the assessment that we make of the patient, their actual clinical presentation on a particular call is far more important than what's on a Medic Alert bracelet.
And Craig goes even further. He says to base medical treatment solely on directions from a bracelet could jeopardize a life.
It is entirely possible for somebody who is a diabetic who has repeated problems with their diabetes instead to have a heart attack on a particular day, and it would be a tragic and deadly error to make the leap between their past medical history and their current condition.
Be a good boy. Brian Kenny and his family are shocked that their bracelets could be overlooked in an emergency.
Do I have to go swimming tomorrow?
Yes, Brian.
He's a pretty typical 9-year-old, but Brian can't eat peanut butter.
Well, I swell up with these round, big bumps on my face.
And?
I've never been told the rest.
It's an allergy that could be fatal, so Brian wears a Medic Alert bracelet. But he's not the only one in this family. His father wears one, so does his grandpa. 3 generations who believe the bracelet can mean the difference between life and death.
I have blind faith in it because I don't want to go blind. I have glaucoma, very mild, but that combined with diabetes is a dangerous combination. The diabetes is controlled, but if something did happen, I would want to know that the medical fraternity was aware of that and not giving me something that could interfere with either of those things. What channel you have, kids?
Just 3 of 740,000 Canadians who wear Medic Alert tags.
CIB times 2, screws right hip, right kneecap removed, allergic to morphine.
Every bracelet lists personal medical problems. There's also a hotline number for more detailed information. Medic Alert claims it's all accurate, invaluable, and shouldn't be ignored.
Now, you've had a couple of heart attacks?
Paramedics have told us on many occasions that finding a Medic Alert bracelet is like finding gold. That makes a difference. They know what they're dealing with right away, And that can make such a difference in how they are going to treat a person, how they respond to the situation.
And if the bracelets are being ignored, Medical Alert says it's not their fault. Pat Hughes blames the lack of detailed information on the other over-the-counter bracelets.
If I found you lying on the street, I could tell that you were diabetic or you were allergic to penicillin, but I don't know who you are. I don't know whether you're on any medication. I have nobody to call. I don't know your doctor.
In their defense, these other bracelet manufacturers say their products are a basic warning device, one that they assume paramedics pay attention to.
Down in the Daphworth Woodbine area.
The system defends itself too, saying training for paramedics and ambulance staff is intense. Decisions often must be made within seconds. All are taught that Medical Alert bracelets could help in those decisions.
All ambulance personnel are thoroughly trained in how to conduct a patient assessment. Now that patient assessment includes looking for Medical Alert necklaces, wrist and ankle bracelets. They know how valuable the information on the tag can be to a call.
And that is?
That it can provide an essential clue to us as to what's wrong with the patient.
Now we're looking at a particular inquest in a particular case, Clayton Sibb. There he was wearing a Medical Alert bracelet. The paramedic didn't notice it, didn't even take note of it. So I, as a reporter, am questioning whether our paramedics and ambulance personnel are trained well enough to look for these bracelets. Is it ingrained in the course that, yes, this should be done?
To look for the presence of Medical Alert and consider the narrative that's on the Medical Alert? Yes, it's in our training programs and part of our testing procedures.
Regardless of what Medical Alert says, what medical trainers say, the Sibb case has raised the question, are medical bracelets simply being ignored? And that leaves the Kennys angry and frustrated.
That they wouldn't take advantage of that opportunity to quickly get medical information before they did anything astounds me, quite frankly.
You never know. It could be me. It could be anyone.
Suhanna Marchand, CBC News, Toronto.
If you wear a Medical Alert bracelet and you have any stories to tell, we'd like to hear from you. We'll give you our address and fax number at the end of the program. On our show, which aired on January 8th, we posed two baseball questions. Why does an umpire give a visual signal for balls and strikes? And who was the player responsible for this aspect of officiating? Well, we have a winner, but first to the correct answers. An umpire signals strikes and balls because of a player who had to see the call because he couldn't hear it. The player's name was William Ellsworth Hoy. He was deaf and couldn't speak. He required that the call be given with a visual signal. From 1888 to 1902, Hoy played with Washington, Cincinnati, and Louisville of the National League and the Chicago White Sox of the American League. Hoy, incidentally, lived to be 99 years old. And now to the winner of our quiz. Bill Coomer of Chester, Nova Scotia, correctly answered both questions. Mr. Coomer, your DNet cap, pin, T-shirt, and CBC coffee mug are on the way. Congratulations. That's our show. I'm Bill McQueen. And now here's our address. Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. That's Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W 1E6. Or you can fax us at 416-205-3399.
This program is brought to you in part by the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto and the Canadian Association of Independent Living Centres.